read roll. Please let us know if you're here. Commissioner Carl Baxmeyer, he's present. He just stepped out. Councilman Jessica Bohannon.
Here.
Commissioner Mike Burrows.
Here.
District Deputy Commissioner Deitchley.
Here.
Councilman Doug Graham.
Here.
Commissioner Carrie Groninger.
Here.
Councilwoman Kathy Groninger.
Here.
Councilwoman Lori Hammond. Councilperson Dwight Fish.
Yes.
We're here for it.
Councilman Greg Hixenbaugh.
Here.
Mayor Phil Jenkins. District Deputy Commissioner Todd Johnson. Mayor James Mueller. Mayor Rod Robertson.
Here.
Councilman Mark Root.
Here.
Mayor Mark Center.
Yo.
Mayor Jeremy Stutzman. Mayor Joseph Tallmer. Commissioner Susie Wyrick.
Here.
Mayor David Wood.
Here.
We have a quorum of members present.
How about the minutes for the May 10th meeting? I move for approval.
Second, Doug.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And I don't have anything. Financial report, Debbie?
Good morning, everyone. So you all have the April 2023 financial report. Our year-to-date expense to the end of fiscal year 23 to date is $6,047,809.52. And I just want to point out, we finally got our final audit invoice for this year's audit. So next month, we're going to do those adjustments that we mentioned probably several months ago that we covered. But we're going to adjust that line item, and we're going to adjust a couple other line items of things that we're getting pretty close on to finish out the year, so that we're all in balance there.
Yeah, and just one point that we've talked about previously that you'll see when we do that modification to this existing budget, which probably will be next month, is that MACOG has a new AmeriCorps program. We received new revenue for that, but then that also means that we're going to add 2 new line items that were not previously on this, which will be AmeriCorps living allowance and AmeriCorps member support. So those items will show up, and those will be, you'll see when we talk about next year's budget, they're already shown in that one. But since that was a new program, we want to try and figure out the best ways to display it, what type of line item would they look best in, those kind of things. So when we go to modify this when you get the May financials at the next meeting, we'll plan to modify this budget to reflect that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I just want to point out the expenses are already in with this budget. They're just absorbed into the line items we already have. So like the member fees that we're paying, they're lumped in our salaries right now. So those are going to come back out, and it's going to be its own line item. And then the expenses that are related to that will come back out of some of these other line items. So that'll be, they're already absorbed in here, but they'll be split out next month when we do that revision.
James, when we previously did AmeriCorps, did it come through MACOG, or did it come through the municipality?
I mean, municipalities have had AmeriCorps programs.
Is this the first time for MACOG?
Yeah, so this year has been our first year with members. Yes.
Okay.
And so,
I thought you had a previous one.
yeah, no, we haven't. So we had a planning grant, and that's what you might be remembering.
Okay.
So 2 years ago, we received a grant to plan to have an AmeriCorps program, and that let us bring on a staff member to start to set up the scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
And then this year was our first year with members. Mm-hmm. And then we're looking at future years of how we expand the number of members and service sites. So now a lot of what we're doing with that program is supporting local governments. Mm-hmm. So like the EEC has a few members and those kind of things. So definitely looking to support and build capacity for local government there around the topics of environmental stewardship and economic resilience.
So,
Okay, let's finish with the report. The cash balance at the end of April was $2,713,031.41. And our total disbursements for the month of April was $548,091.24. There any questions over the April financial report? Hearing none, I'd like to ask for board approval of the April 2020 financial reports.
Motion to approve. Second. Motion is second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries.
All right, and you also should have the 2024 fiscal year quick budget for this year. And like James said, this one is reflecting the new AmeriCorps program. So you'll see that split out in the revenues, and you'll also see that how it's going to be split out in the expenses there. Our new budget will be at $11,800,368. And the biggest changes from fiscal year 23 to 24 is going to be in a reduction in the printing and reproduction line item. So we're not doing as much printing as we used to do. There is a very large increase in the equipment, furniture, and vehicles line item because we're planning to buy four new buses.
Yes.
Plus a few new vans in this next fiscal year.
And just to put that in perspective, so we have 4 buses that are on order with New Flyer. Those are the diesel 35-foot vehicles. They'll be very similar to what Transpo has, except ours will be diesel, theirs are CNG. So obviously one key difference. But just to put it in perspective, those 4 vehicles, the purchase order that we signed is for $2.3 million. So the majority of this change is that last year we were hoping that based on the climate, we might be able to get 2 vehicles. That didn't happen because of because of the supply chain challenges. But now we have an order with New Flyer. We're supposed to get those vehicles in Q4 of this year. That's what we're hoping. But instead of it being 2 vehicles, now it's 4. And because of cost of goods, that's generally gone up. We're now talking at a purchase order of $2.3 million for those 4 vehicles. So the biggest change in that line item is for those buses. And then we have some ADA vans that we're planning to order, which will be about $200,000 as well. So that's the majority of that equipment, furniture, and vehicle line item.
For clarification, when you say Q4, are you talking about in 23 or in our fiscal budget?
Yeah, that's a great question. Q4 of the calendar year. So we're hoping that a wonderful Christmas gift for the transit side of our organization will be 4 new buses. Those are being built in Alabama, or is it Alabama, Tukesville? I think, yeah, Alabama. I was trying to remember if it was Alabama or Arkansas, but Alabama. And those are New Flyer vehicles.
I think we need a road trip to explore those during football season.
James, are they Wi-Fi? They have Wi-Fi capabilities?
I know that we will have Wi-Fi on them for various things that we're supporting in our technology.
Right.
I don't know that it'll be public, but I'm sure we could always explore that at a further time.
Are these the trolley looking buses?
So they're actually identical to what Transpo has. It's the New Flyer, and it's a 35-foot, but it is for the trolley, for that system. Our existing manufacturer, which we've had those vehicles for, some of the oldest ones are going on 10 years. We've been having a lot of challenges with part sourcing. A lot of challenges. And so we were able to use another state's QPA, Qualified Purchasing Agreement. We evaluated the vendors that were off that, which were Gillig, Eldorado, and New Flyer. And it made the most sense from the advantages to us, which was delivery time frame and cost and all of those things, as well as then the potential for now that Transpo has 50 vehicles, we would have another 15 if those were all of a similar, where, obviously there's different fuel types, but that would allow us to maybe part source from each other at times. So creates kind of a bigger regional fleet, if you will.
What's the per unit cost on it?
2.3, I think it's about $500,000 or so. A little over that, which our vehicles 10 years ago were about $400,000. And there's some generalized rounding here. But these vehicles are also about 5 foot longer. And then inflation and everything that's gone on over the last 10 years, that's been it's the best price we could find.
Hey, James, down that same mindset as far as from a cost per mile or per mile or per hour, have you looked at, with Transpo having those buses for years, I mean, you have some historical data to be able to look at the cost per mile or hour and the see some savings even in maintenance costs?
Yeah. I mean, so right now we've been having some challenges
Right.
because of maintenance and just being able to get parts, particularly springs. The spring supplier for our existing manufacturer had a part that broke and it needed to get remade in Germany, and it's been over 12 months and we still haven't been able to get our spring orders fulfilled. And so, I mean, part of newer vehicles will be the ability to, have better reliability, let alone then, just in the sense of we're at these vehicles' useful lives in terms of years. So they are starting to mature out. Obviously, if we were having all the parts and everything like that, we'd be able to keep them up longer. So it doesn't have to be a perfect hard stop at 10 years.
Right.
But, there will be a little bit of a difference between us and Transpo in the fact that their vehicles are CNG.
Right.
So
Still, there'll be a lot of parts that are changed.
There are, yeah. And so that's one of those advantageous things that we saw being able to switch to New Flyer, in addition to 4 vehicles being able to deliver hopefully by Q4 of this year, where our current supplier, we haven't been able to get a spring delivered for 12 months. So
I know, looking at the budget, I mean, the dollars work out as far as the revenue. So with these new buses, where's all that money coming from? Is that an additional grant? Or where's that?
yeah, that's a great question. So part of our CARES allocation, and our funds were already obligated, so they weren't never at risk. They were already in a grant, they were obligated, so they were never at risk. But part of our CARES allocation, we had about $980,000 there in 100% funds. We have some retained funds because 1 or 2 of our vehicles were involved in various incidents where in one a crash occurred, which we were not at fault for. And so we have insurance payments and those kind of things that we retain that need to be reinvested in vehicles. So that kind of comes off the top. Then you have the 100% funds of the CARES. And then we have some existing grants that have 80-20 funding that have used our 5307 allocation, our normal annual allocation, but we programmed it in there for capital purchases. And so really the majority of those funds are accounted for. It's not a perfect 80-20 because there's a lot of 100% that's coming off the top, but then those additional funds in local funds that'll be used to match any of those dollars would be coming out of what we would call our transit trust fund, essentially our savings account that's interest bearing, that we retain all of our transit funds in. So sometimes that's funds that we've received from transferring money back and forth between Lafayette, as we've talked about previously, to have some additional local funds. So hopefully that gives you a brief snapshot.
That's good questions, but as you replace the fleet, I mean, this is 4 of the 15. So, I mean, is this something that you're going to see an ongoing additional cost needed to continue to fund at the level to replace these buses, or what's your plan there?
Yeah, so We have, over the last 2 fiscal years in our allocations, as long as FTA gets around to approving those draft grant agreements, we have made sure that over the last 2 years, we have fully programmed our allocations for operations, both in the capital cost of contracting, which allows us to do 80/20 funds for operations, as well as then ADA paratransit, which we're able to do a small amount at 80/20. So that reduces the amount of match that we have to have. But then the rest of it has been programmed for 50/50 operating. So that means the next few allocations, we may have the opportunity to either talk to our partners over in Lafayette, trade some federal funds to receive local funds, or look at programming those federal funds for capital purchases to start to make that fleet transition. So it's not a fully mapped out, fully funded 15 bus replacement at this point.
Right.
But I mean, there's the framework of a plan.
Then the buses you're taking out of service, do they have any value from a trade or?
We do usually offer them in auction. We usually use Gov Deals because that provides us with a very streamlined process, because we don't usually have a ton to offer to host our own auction. So we usually use that site. And then those retained earnings, depending on how much it sells for, there's a few new federal rules that we have to follow. But usually if it's under $5,000 or less, if it sells for that, then we're just able to hold on to it and then reinvest that back into the fleet. If it's over $5,000, there's some new rules that we may have to follow. Previously, what you did is you had to flag it in your accounting system, and it was restricted only for replacing new buses in the future. Because of new federal laws, there's perhaps a payback requirement where we have to figure out how to cut a check, and they have to
So they're not doing any good to get more than $5,000 a bus.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know based on yeah, we'll see where it goes. But yeah, so that's the biggest
Can I follow up
aspect.
a little bit with this question?
Yeah.
Because I think he half asked my question, but so we don't have a regular replacement cycle for these buses. We do it because what concerns me is we're replacing 25% of the buses with this one order. And that creates a bubble down the line when they
So-
age at the same time.
Yep. So we do is what I would say, because anyone who was here during 2014, when I first started taking over as the executive director, we were placing an order for 7 buses, which is at that point was over half the fleet, which we were very much not on a replacement schedule per se. Our original plan was that we would constantly be buying 2 buses at a time. Every year, it would become part of our routine. And if we timed that correctly, there'd be maybe a year where you lagged, but every year, if you're buying 2 buses, you kind of go through in a 10-year time frame a replacement cycle, maybe a little faster. So maybe towards the back end of those years, you're only buying 1 at a time. But that was really supposed to start to take effect in 2021 when we were going to be replacing those vehicles. Well, the vehicle kind of industry, especially the transit vehicle industry, our lead times and everything to be able to buy a bus, to be able to even issue our own RFP. The OEMs told us, basically, don't even bother issuing your own RFP. We're not going to respond. You don't have a big enough fleet. You need to go figure out a way to buy off of somebody else's. And so much of what happened post-COVID changed that landscape for buying and replacing vehicles that we needed to take a year or two to figure out what the new landscape looked like, be able to figure out all of that, figure out all those lead times. And so right now we're trying to catch up for that missed year. So we're buying 4, then the next order will probably be for 4, and then we can start to settle into that cadence of 2 at a time. And that's where we were with the ADA vans, where we were always buying 1 to 2 per year. Those have a much quicker useful life. You're talking about 100,000 miles typically. But those vehicles, many of the, like the state QPA for those vehicles closed for about 1.5 years because just the pricing surge, the vendor couldn't guarantee prices. So a lot of it has been post-COVID, just trying to figure out the new market system.
I understand that,
So, yeah.
but my experience has been, if you think you're saving money by hanging on to old equipment, you're really not. 'Cause
Yeah.
You're gonna spend it more in downtime and in parts and in obsolete. I mean, the technology drives these things out of
Yeah.
the market, so.
Yeah, no, our preference would be that we would be always every year kind of purchasing 2 vehicles, maybe some years one. Maybe
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah.
You see 15 vehicles, 10-year
Yep.
life is 1.5 a year,
Yep.
you know, so, I mean, that would make sense.
Yep.
But my point is, we're creating a bubble years from now by buying 4 that we'll have to work our way through in the future.
Yeah, and that's what we were trying to
Yeah,
avoid,
right.
because previously we were at a bubble of 7, and so it was half the fleet. And to be able to come up with those kind of capital funds all at once, it was very cost burdensome to the budget and our overall funding. So
Well,
we're
plus we
trying to
also
even
have
that.
7 aides at the same time, which costs more, so I mean.
Oh, yeah,
Anyway.
absolutely.
Well,
Great
part of the
points.
problem with like what we're replacing is 2 of our buses were totaled.
Yeah.
So 2 of the buses we're replacing were involved in incidents. So
Yeah.
not to say that that can't happen in other years too, but
Yeah.
that's part of the reason.
I see.
But
I
to have an
see.
accident, we gotta have it with an old bus, not a newer bus.
Yeah.
I see
One of them
Councilwoman
was, and one of them
Hammond
was-
has her hand raised.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I'm not able to be with you in person. I'm just wondering about the choice to purchase diesel versus the GNC. The Transpo board has been working pretty diligently to try and get away from the diesel. And I'm just wondering, it seems that we're working backwards here.
Yeah, no, I'm not working backwards, because our current vehicles are diesel. And a newer diesel vehicle is inherently better on its emission than an older diesel vehicle. Part of the challenge from our perspective is that we contract out every 5 years roughly our services to operate the vehicles. MACOG does not own land. We do not have a maintenance facility. And so all of that runs through that contracted vendor. And so for us to take capital dollars and invest in anyone like our current vendor, which is Royal Excursion. So if we were to put in a CNG fueling center at their facility or electric vehicle fueling, 5 years from now, theoretically, if they do not win that procurement, are we going to then rip up and try and take that CNG or electric vehicle charging facility with us? That poses a challenge, which we are going to take a look at how we can, start to transition or look at transitioning to alternate fuel types. Probably, I know Transpo is doing this right now, where I think Chris Kubasek and Amy programmed some funding to do a fleet transition study or something like that. We might look at that. But then also the other aspect of it is that because we did look under this procurement for what the pricing was for CNG or electric, and that was at least an additional 100,000 per vehicle. And for us, we're not a taxing entity. We have limited local funds and federal funds available to us. And so for us at this venture, with these 4 vehicles, it didn't make mathematical sense on what we could afford. And so we're continuing to evaluate that, and we'll continue to evaluate that moving forward. But first we would need to figure out, with whatever fuel type we're going to go with outside of, say, diesel, how we would refuel vehicles. If that's ever an opportunity for us. So that would be kind of one of those key things that we need to figure out, and always has been somewhat prohibitive to us looking at alt fuel types at this point, but it is something we will consider moving forward.
So,
Okay, thank you.
Mishawaka Transfer Center is the only center that has transpo and is served also by the trolley.
Mhm.
They're the same kinds of bus. What will the livery be different? The branding, are they going to be green? What, they going to look like the trolleys?
Yes, our vehicles will still have individualized kind of color scheme and marketing to it. So that they still, it'll be a all green vehicle with the interurban trolley logo and whatnot on it. So, but then some of those vehicles will be wrapped with advertisements and those kind of things.
Right.
So we'll have our destination signage on it. So you have destination sign on the top and on the side, as well as the back, so that it'll still be clear for individuals of what bus they're getting on. So, yep, great question.
Couple of questions
Yeah.
about, you mentioned some contract services and we see quite a jump in that.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? And then also conferences and training, where we see quite a jump in that.
Yeah, so when it comes to contractual services, part of what we're estimating in percentage change there is that we do have a procurement that will go out this year for that trolley service. And so anytime that we've had locked in pricing for the last few years, because it was something that we negotiated about five years ago. So part of it is just anticipation of cost increase.
Okay.
The other part, though, is that we received about $500,000 from USDOT under the Safe Streets for All grant program. And that is a program that is focusing on trying to reduce severe injuries and fatalities across the entire transportation system. And so a lot of that funding will be used for consultant services to put together kind of our regional safety action plan. So part of those increases are just changes in what we anticipate from the trolley side of things, but then also other contractual services that we have, like that study.
That study you're talking about then,
Yeah.
we can't do that in-house with our staff?
Theoretically, yes, we could, but then they would need to stop doing everything else that they're doing. So in order to maintain our transportation improvement program and do quarterly tracking and help with community crossings and all of those kind of things.
It doesn't mean to be an insult
No,
or anything
not
like
at
that.
all. It's something that we evaluated where we think our staff will provide the best with those funds, and where we've accommodated for those funds to be used on our staff is for public engagement. Whereas for the technical analysis kind of side of things, that will be a little bit more time consuming. And so we're wanting to have that consulted out.
With that broad study, then are there people within the state or within the local region that we could use versus California or Connecticut
Yeah,
company?
so it is federal funds, so we typically don't discriminate based on geography for that, because that's usually something that we aren't necessarily, there are going to be probably local firms involved.
Yeah.
I don't know if the lead will be a local or a national firm. We haven't issued that RFP, so I don't have proposals in front of me to let me know. But I mean, there are definitely firms throughout the state that you would consider with that.
Yeah.
But will their project manager be an Indiana-based person?
Well, I just want it to be local
Yeah.
if we can.
I believe that local firms will definitely be involved in that, because I would anticipate that it would be a team, rather than just a sole singular consultant. But I have no,
Whatever the
I have
requirements.
no crystal ball. Yeah.
Right. And then also the conference and training, we'll see a pretty good increase there.
Yeah, part of it is making sure that we've adjusted for AmeriCorps. Because that's a newer program. AmeriCorps has a number of conference and training requirements. But also that line item went down during COVID because we weren't using it as much. And so now we're really bringing it up to the kind of previous historic trends.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions?
What's the underpaid indirect and overpaid indirect?
Yeah.
Like a big swing there from a
That's a great question.
So, yeah. So every year, because we use fixed indirect rate and, fringe rate calculations, when we prepare the cost allocation report for the next fiscal year, we have to adjust for any over and unders that we have. So like if our indirect rate pool was $100,000, so that means like we actually spent $100,000 in indirect, but our fixed rate made the cost be $150,000. We would have to take that. We basically made $50,000, so we would have to adjust that on the next. It's really 2 years later, but on a next report. So that gets adjusted on here on our budget. Every year there's always something here. So this is from 2 years ago.
So for all of our grant programs, we want to make sure that our fringe benefits, which are health insurance, vacation, all those things, but also our indirect items, which may be legal fees, or it might be rent, or it might be staff time that is spent on something that would be too burdensome to individualize into each grant program. So
Like accounting.
opening mail or
My stuff's
accounting,
always
or,
indirect.
right? So some of our staff time is done in support of all of our grant programs, but you're not going to divide up 2 minutes here and 3 minutes there. So all of that feeds into indirect, and we want those to be compensated by all of our grant partners, right? Like we want to recoup those funds. So every year I working with accounting, have the great responsibility of putting together the cost allocation plan, which essentially tries to estimate what all of our direct salaries will be and what all of these other items in fringe and indirect will be. And that creates a rate. Okay, so it's a rate based off direct salaries. That then is applied as we are submitting our claims. And so as we're submitting claims to say INDOT or USDOT, based on our direct salaries, you know, something like 0.52 is going towards fringe benefits and 0.67 is going towards fringe, or whatever the rate is, towards fringe and indirect. And so we're recouping that. But then in order to make sure that we're not necessarily taking more than we need, because that's an estimate, right? We're taking an estimate. At the end of that fiscal year, we go through and see what the actual fringe expenses were and the actual indirect expenses were. And there's a difference, right? And sometimes the difference is, well, direct salary and an individual, they left. And so we weren't pulling in enough fringe, or we weren't pulling in because our direct salaries were lower. So the numerator was too low compared to what we thought, or sometimes we didn't have the expenses. And so all of that then leads to minor variances each fiscal year. And then in the next budget, we try and figure out, or we do figure out what that variance was, and it's either positive or negative. And so in some years, if it's positive, then we add that back in. If it's negative, that means we took too much, and so we're going to take a little less this year. So essentially, that underpaid or overpaid indirect is that balancing act to make sure that our grantors aren't giving us too much or too little money each fiscal year. If that, yeah.
Could you please explain the increase in the fringe benefits?
Sure. The biggest portion of our fringe benefits tends to be our health insurance. So we do have our own health insurance. We're not on any municipality's health insurance. And so since we're typically a smaller, I mean, we only have about 20 full-time employees. So that tends to be the biggest driver of our fringe benefits. So that is the biggest portion, is just an estimated increase to that. During the 2 years of COVID, it didn't increase at all, because it was temporarily paused, but in the past, we've had 13+% increase, for that. So it's an estimate, it's anticipated. You'll see in our fringe benefits for this last year, my estimate probably slightly higher than in April, we were only at 69% spent. So we're probably going to come in under. So we're never guaranteed because our renewal doesn't happen until the end of the fiscal year. So it's always hard to predict, but a lot of it is anticipated. Also, if we add new positions, then there is then an increase in the overall fringe, because we usually estimate, when we're estimating, that person will use a family plan insurance. So it's the highest potential cost from an estimation. And so right now we have, like one position that I think wasn't accommodated for in last year's budget that's in this year's budget. So that'll add a small increase. So, but largely the majority of our fringe benefit that cost us the most would be healthcare. So
What's the total staff again?
about 20 full-time staff members. I mean, that fluctuates between 19 and 22 is what because that's not including our part-time folks or seasonal folks, and it does not include our AmeriCorps members because they are not employees, they are members. If you're adding all of that in, there's probably about 30 to 40 folks, but full-time.
20 benefit.
Yep.
James, I know a family that can benefit about $30,000 a year.
Yeah. It does. One of the things that we need to probably discuss, and I'd be happy to refer this to exec if you all would want, but it has been a while since we have adjusted how much our employees pay. It's a really great benefit. And so we don't want to lose that. We want to continue to offer great health insurance. We think that's really valuable and attractive to our employees and our overall compensation. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And I don't want to, we're on a grandfathered insurance program. And if we change to marketplace kind of things, it costs us more and provides our employees with less of a benefit. But one of those things that we could look at is employee contribution.
Are they paying a percentage or
it's been a fixed amount, and it's been a fixed amount since
I've been. Increases are probably eating that live.
Yeah, and it's been a fixed amount since I've been an employee, and it's been the same fixed amount. And I've been with the organization since 2008. So it's probably past.
Better look at that.
It's probably, I have.
Wonderful benefit though.
It is, but it's probably past due for an adjustment. I would be happy to have further conversation. I have spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentation and all sorts of stuff that I'd be happy to share with exec, to evaluate what we want to do with that moving into this next calendar year.
You know the percentage for 2023?
Of how much employees pay? It's negligible.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I have a family plan, and I'd be happy to talk to you after the meeting about how much I pay.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yep.
A sacred cow.
Wonderful benefit.
Are you looking for a motion to accept the budget?
I believe we would need a motion to accept the budget for this next fiscal year.
Happy to make that motion.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thanks for answering a lot of those questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was really good conversation today. Since I still have the floor a little bit, I just wanted to bring up, because Susie had asked a few months ago about if we had looked into any investments like CDs. And my coworker, she called several places and got a bunch of CD rate referrals. And then when I reviewed those and looked at what our current bank accounts are getting, we actually are getting over 5% right now. So the CDs were slightly less than that. So we're just keeping our money in our savings accounts for now, but we'll just continually review that kind of stuff as we go along through the year. It was kind of surprising to find how much our bank account had jumped up just in like 2 or 3 months.
I appreciate the feedback, and I know at the county, we've had a similar analysis, but at other organizations, you know, you're still getting under 1%, so the CDs made sense.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think-
we're lucky we have the account that we have. And it was like way low for, you know, during those COVID years, but
we're with Lake City
Lake
Bank.
City Bank.
And
You have a sweep account or how's it set up?
It's not.
it's gonna be above my head.
It should be.
Honestly,
Yeah,
it's
so
a business account, but I think it's for public funds, but I don't think it's any kind of special sweep or anything like that.
yeah, we'd be happy to get you more details. I know
I
we
can give
did
you my
an
contact people. there.
RFP right before 2020 where we evaluated a number of banks and they gave us their best proposals. Lake City provided us with the best overall proposal, which included that interest rate. It is a variable interest rate though, which was challenging during COVID because it basically evaporated to zero.
Yeah, it was
But then as things improved, that interest rate is kicked back up. And part of the reason that we went to it back in like 2019 was that it was higher than most of the marketed CD rates for public funds. But it wasn't as restricted in the sense that, you know, we were able to access those funds in a much quicker manner. But happy to get you more details. I don't have it off the top of my head, and I apologize for that. Yeah.
Headquartered in Warsaw.
I think
Thanks, Debbie.
Mayor Jenkins couldn't be here today, so he gave me his report for the secretary's report, which is that you have your May modifications in front of you. Those modifications are things that you've given staff authority to change in between meetings in the transportation improvement program. If you have any questions, please let us know. This is presented for informational purposes only. You can also find it online if you're a member of the public. Thus concludes the secretary's report for today.
Thank you. And other new business.
All right, good morning. One thing I wanted to point out about both modifications as well as our amendments is we're currently in this phase of updating 2 transportation programs. So we have our currently approved state fiscal year 22 to 26 TIP. And then we also have our recently adopted 24 to 28 TIP. And so all of these actions are happening in both TIPs until we receive final approval from NDOT and Federal Highway and the state. So item A for Transportation Resolution 23-23 is just due to kind of amending both TIPs. We did not remove this phase for Blackport Drive from Monroe Street to Lincoln Avenue. This is for PE. We had it in fiscal year 24 in our new TIP. However, we are fortunate to obligate those funds this fiscal year, and so we're able to start that project a little bit earlier than we anticipated. So item A is to remove PE from our new 24 to 28 TIP. If there are no questions, I would ask for your approval of resolution 23-23.
Motion to approve. Second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries.
Our last resolution today is transit initiated 24-23. The interurban trolley is currently programming in 5307 funds. Item A is for the capital cost of third-party contracting. Item B is for operating assistance of our fixed route, and item C is operating assistance for ADA paratransit service. If there are no questions, I would ask for your approval of resolution 24-24.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried.
All right, we have a number of new staff members who have started with us since the last policy board. At the last policy board, we announced the departures of Allison Reagan and Sophia Gladden. We have their replacements here today. So Dana Weaver is here. She is our new short-range transportation planner. Dana, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning, I'm Dana. I'm from the South Bend, Mishawaka region. I was born and raised here, but I just recently graduated from IU Bloomington with a degree in public affairs and in modern and urban studies. And I'm excited to be here.
Go IU.
So Dana will be working on all things transportation, especially the Transportation Improvement Program. Then replacing Sophia here today is Olivia Nix. She's our new community development planner. So Olivia.
Hi, similarly, I grew up here actually in Napanee, graduated from Northwood, and then got a degree down at IU in law policy. I graduated in May of 2021, spent some time out in Denver, and just recently moved back to accept this job. And I'm also excited to get on board and get working.
So Olivia will be working in community development, working especially a lot with our smaller towns and communities on different plans like comprehensive plans. Also then we have 2 summer interns. So one of them who could join us today is Emily Smith. So Emily, if you want to say hi.
Hi, good morning. My name is Emily Smith. I'm from South Bend, and I just graduated from the University of Illinois in Champaign with a degree in urban studies and planning. And I'll be here just for the summer, but I'm primarily conducting research on the interurban trolley and senior stops.
Welcome, ladies.
Yeah, welcome.
And then our last intern who couldn't be here today with us is Antonio Valdez. And Antonio, he is at Notre Dame. He just finished doing a study abroad in London, so just recently came back. And so he's going to be working on a number of things, bike ped and bike kind of parking survey kind of information, data collection. Somebody else can explain that much better than I, but that's the general summary. All right. Next, this is for informational purposes. We've talked about this a few times, but MACOG submitted last night our charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grant. This is a discretionary grant program that was for electric vehicle charging and fueling infrastructure. We worked with a number of a lot of our smaller towns. I think it was at least 10 small towns that were included on that overall submittal. The overall submittal portfolio looked like about funding for about 3 level 3 fast charging locations and about another 20 of the level 2. Some of the level 2 were slightly faster than the minimum standard, so that they were like a super fast charger level 2. Again, Leah could do a better job than I, but she was texting me as late as 8 p.m. last night, so I told her I'll take care of this morning. So that grant is submitted, so now we play the waiting game to figure out if that was successful or not. But I want to thank all of you for your involvement in that as we pursued that grant opportunity for the region. So that is submitted as of last night.
Do you have any idea when it's going to be awarded?
No, we tried to look at that, and some of the grant programs like RAISE has a very clear date on when they're going to make an announcement. Other grant programs have not had a clear announcement date, and so we don't really have a time frame for the charging and fueling infrastructure program. This is also their first call, so there's no historic like, oh, roughly. Yeah, so I would say anytime between the next 2 months and next year would seem like a kind of a fair window. I know the FRA had a railroad grade crossing elimination program that I feel like took about 8 months to get an overall award. Yeah.
James,
Yes,
and I know
Mayor.
Leah worked really hard on that. And I
Yeah.
talked to her a couple of times
Yeah.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Not prior. And I think she indicated that she was hopeful by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But as he just indicated, there's no previous history.
Yep.
I didn't know that there were level 3 charging stations included in that.
Yeah. So there were, so all of it is a generalized framework where if we're successful, there will also be an RFP for these official locations. Because, so there will be a process, but we tried to make sure that we understood who might feed into that process. Okay. But yeah, I mean, there were, and I'm happy to talk about where some of those ones that we estimated were, but none of it's necessarily completely set in stone because of the way in which that a lot of these will end up having to be on private property, whether it's private public property or private property. And so a lot of them, if it's my understanding, we would have to have some degree of an RFP for. So, yep.
Thanks.
Happy to talk to you about it further.
James, I was here last month, but I forgot, what's the dollar amount of the grant request?
Yeah, so the overall dollar request, I believe off the I might be able to give you a better number if I look at my notes here.
I can go back and look at
Yeah, no, you're okay.
my notes from last month.
And it might have changed just because of like who was interested and also we kind of bumped up some of those level 2 so they would be faster charging. So the estimated federal funds that were applied for was about $4.2 million. So it's about a $6 million overall set of project.
Gotcha.
So
Thank you.
Yep.
Caitlin.
Right. 2 other updates on some upcoming grant programs. The Next Level Trails Trail Grant Program is opening up starting in July. So this funds both regional and locally significant trails in the state. There's about $22.5 million available for regionally significant projects and $7.5 million available for locally significant projects. We've been having a variety of conversations with some communities around our region. But if you're interested in maybe putting in an application, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to assist with that application process. Then a very familiar program is on the horizon. The 2023 Round 2 Community Crossing Matching Grant Program is opening up July 5th and will close at the end of July. We've already been helping out a few communities with crash data requests and things like that. So feel free to have your staff reach out to us. In addition, we're also scheduling many communities out with PASER rating and completion of their asset management plans to prepare for next year's CCMG program. And a quick update, we'll be holding our quarterly tracking and review meetings with local government staff, NDOT, and consultants on Wednesday, June 28th. I think we have about 50 some projects to go through that day, so it'll be a fun and riveting discussion, but we're looking forward to holding those at the end of June. Another update is that the NDOT's state fiscal year 24 to 28 statewide transportation improvement program is currently out for public comment. They're accepting comments through June 22nd. You're welcome to go to the website. They have a recording of one of their virtual town halls. But our tip is incorporated into the STIP by reference, so you're welcome to comment on projects in our region as well. And hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll have an approved STIP and final tip coming later this summer.
Caitlin, how do you access that report?
The STIP, I can send you a link if you're interested. They have it on their website.
That'd be great. Please. Yeah. Thank you.
And then I wanted to provide a little update on Propel US 30. For the month of June, they've been holding a series of public meetings related to the vision, goals, and then the draft purpose and need for these planning environmental linkages studies. I do have 2 copies of the US 30 East and US 30 West purpose and need reports if you're interested in looking at them. They're accepting public comments through July, the end of July currently, on these draft documents.
Yeah, I'll go over them. Just to make you aware, there was a change, obviously, with the legislative cycle. There were a lot of changes, but one of them that affects you with transportation, which I believe is a positive change, was House Bill 1049. It was titled Transportation Matters. There were probably other aspects to House Bill 1049 that we're not covering here. One of them is the criteria for awarding a contract. Okay, so you'll remember in the past, we have talked about that the previous kind of law was, in order to determine lowest responsive and qualified bids for your construction projects for NDOT projects, it was less than $1 million, 4 or more bids, and then not more than 15% above the estimated cost of the project. So because of the bidding climate, because of the challenges, especially that local governments have seen through going through the NDOT process and then having those bids be rejected because it wasn't competitive, because there weren't enough bidders or the cost was more than 15% of the original estimate, or your project was more than $1 million, right? Like all of those things caused a number of our projects and a number of your projects to have to go back to be rebid. Sometimes, as the mayor will tell you, multiple times, and each time your project got infinitely more expensive. It never got cheaper. Okay, so the legislature made some changes. So the new rules are slightly better. Okay, so the new rules is if your project is $3 million in construction or less, it's already considered a competitive bid, no matter how many people bid on it, no matter if it was within 115% or 130% of the original estimate. It's considered competitive bid if your project was under $3 million. Okay. The other criteria that changed is instead of 4 or more bids, it's 3 or more bids now. Okay, so down 1. That's still a little bit challenging in our overall area because of the amount of contractors that have bought each other consolidated. We have seen a few that have seen 3 or more bids, but for the most part, we're usually at 1 or 2. So probably the area that provides you the most flexibility is if you have a project less than $3 million. But hopefully, if you have a sidewalk project, this will let your sidewalk project loose, so you won't have to bid it 7 times. Okay, so this is just a small change, but a change that we wanted to make sure that you're aware of. That'll be effective July 1, so we're coming up on that. So FYI.
So it just has to be one of those.
One of them. Doesn't have to be all 3, just 1. But the challenge, so the one that usually was always the saving grace was not more than 15% of the original estimate, the engineer's estimate. But over the last 3 years with inflation and cost increases, that has been a very unpredictable criteria. So that hasn't been the thing that's done it. And then because of our overall contractor climate, there's just usually not 3 or more contractors that are bidding. So that's always been ruled out for the last few years. So really the only saving grace over the last few years was either you had a very high engineer's estimate that cushioned you, or your project was always less than $1 million. And so that's made it very difficult. We've seen the sidewalk project in Warsaw have to go to multiple lettings. The coal line in South Bend, it went to an original letting and had to be pulled apart. It went to 3 or 4 lettings. So we've seen a number of projects that just to get an awardable bid has been very difficult. So hopefully this provides some limited relief. So. All right.
It's only on NDOT funded projects.
Yeah, this is projects awarded by the state is, I believe, how the state law is written. But so this applies to all of your federal funds that are going through the NDOT program.
What about community crossing?
No, that's never been a part of this because that's based on your local procurement kind of methods, and state law related to public biddings and all of those. This has always been for like NDOT transportation. I don't remember the exact title for 823.9, but this is always applied to the projects awarded through NDOT. Right. So, yep. All right. The next item, just making you aware of, I don't have the, there we go. Great. Is that, this was an item that NDOT wanted to provide emphasis on in a recent audit of their program, the federal aid program. There were some issues with what the LPA's contract originally said with hourly rates for folks, or whether or not profit margins were built in at particular rates, and then how those were verified or not verified moving forward in those contracts. So we already talked about this with the technical folks at the TTAC, but just in a making sure that you're verifying your invoices that are being submitted from consultants are in alignment with the payment and reimbursement that's outlined in your contract, that essentially they're using the rates that they told you they're going to use, that they're using the margins that they told you they were going to use, and that you're verifying that so that you're asking for the correct reimbursement from NDOT. So just a minor thing. I don't know, we weren't told necessarily that that was an issue here, but just an issue around the state. So wanted to make sure that you saw that. The next item also just largely more for the technical folks. So we already talked to them about this, but just one more contractor that you're going to work with. Norfolk Southern used to do all of their own flagging. And so when you worked with them, you would negotiate with Norfolk Southern and figure out all their pricings for flagging. If you're doing work around their railroads, they have now subcontracted and outsourced that out to Rail Pros. So we provided the TTAC with that contact. That was also in an NDOT newsletter recently. So not a huge thing, but just a new thing. So making sure that you're working on that and that you're aware of that change. So I believe those are all of the updates that we had from a staff perspective.
I just have a follow-up
Yes.
under grants. Of the government readings that I do, it sounds like there's going to be some more monies and available grants in the future, bigger dollars, some more alternative energy, direct solar, things like that. Is that really going to be a trend, or is that just speculation?
I don't know all the grant programs perfectly, but there are still a number of grant programs to be rolled out from the Inflation Reduction Act, which many of those programs were largely, not all of them, but many of them were more sustainability focused. So some of the ones that you mentioned. So I know just yesterday, EPA and some others released their NOFO calendar for the next year or two. So there are a number of programs like the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program that still haven't necessarily rolled out in its full kind of aspect. So there are still a number of those grant programs to roll out.
Is there a good clearinghouse to read about them?
We can send you and send the board the grant calendar that I just saw yesterday from EPA. That might be the most helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep. And also, as a plug, always make sure to check your MACOG Gazette newsletter because it often has a section related to grants. So
well, James, that's a great idea.
Yeah, whenever those NOFOs come out, make sure to like and subscribe that newsletter. It comes out every 2 weeks. So.
Purpose of the floor or public comment.
President, I want to take this opportunity to introduce some new staff here in my office. So Kristen Neighbors is my new executive assistant.
there.
Hi, welcome.
Tife is don't ask me to pronounce her last name, but is my intern in office. She is a math major at the University of Notre Dame. Her mom works for her mom works for the city of New York.
Oh, nice.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you, Dave. And, I'll entertain a motion for number 9.
Adjournment, so move.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So move, guys.